He was a man who commanded armies with a glance, but when the steam cleared and he saw her trembling skin against the dark tiles, the devil forgot how to breathe. Seoul was raining, a relentless gray downpour that matched the soul of the man staring out the window of the skyline penthouse. Sun did not blink. Behind him, a man was begging for mercy in rapid-fire Korean, tied to a chair. Sun didn't turn around. He simply raised a hand, and his lieutenant silenced the man with a single heavy blow. Sun was the head of the Young Pai Syndicate, a CEO by day, a reaper by night. He hadn't smiled in 7 years, not since the fire. His heart was a locked vault, and he had thrown away the key. "Clean this up," Sun said, his voice a low baritone that vibrated through the room. "I'm going home." Miles away in the hills where the rich hid from the poor, Sandra stepped off the bus. She clutched her coat tighter, shivering. She was far from home, a black woman navigating a homogeneous society that often stared at her with curiosity or disdain. But she needed this job. The agency said the pay at the Iron Fortress was triple the standard rate because no maid lasted more than a week. "You must be invisible," the head housekeeper, Mrs. Choi, warned Sandra at the service entrance. Mrs. Choi's eyes scanned Sandra's natural hair and simple clothes critically. "Mr. Sun desires silence. If he sees you, you are doing your job wrong. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am," Sandra replied, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. She had debts to pay and a sick aunt back home. She could be invisible. She was good at hiding her pain. Sandra was assigned the West Wing. It was a museum of cold marble and black glass. As she dusted the endless corridors, she felt the oppressive loneliness of the place. It smelled of expensive cologne and steel. By evening, she was exhausted. The house staff whispered rumors about the master. They said he was a demon. They said he killed a man for looking him in the eye. Sandra was sent to clean the master suite while Sun was reportedly at a dinner. She entered the bathroom, a cavernous space with a rainfall shower large enough for 10 people. She scrubbed the tiles, sweat trickling down her back. She turned on the water to rinse the cleaner, the steam rising instantly, enveloping her in a warm, white fog. It felt so good, so comforting against the cold hostility of the house. For a split second, she closed her eyes, letting the steam kiss her face, forgetting she was a maid, forgetting she was invisible. She didn't hear the heavy bedroom door open. She didn't hear the footsteps on the marble. Sun loosened his tie, his knuckles white. There was a slash on his forearm from a knife fight earlier that evening, a stinging reminder of the coup he had just crushed. He needed the water to wash away the blood and the adrenaline. He didn't bother checking the room. In the Iron Fortress, no one dared enter his sanctuary. He pushed open the frosted glass door of the shower, expecting emptiness. He found a storm. The steam was thick, curling like white smoke. But through the haze, he saw her. Sandra was there, not scrubbing the tiles as she should have been, but standing under the spray, fully clothed in her soaking wet maid's uniform, trying to rinse the chemical cleaner from her hands. The water had plastered the cheap fabric to her skin, outlining curves that were soft, generous, and undeniably feminine. She spun around, a gasp tearing from her throat. Her eyes went wide, terrified, dark orbs that reflected his own deadly silhouette. "Master Sun," she choked out, backing up until her spine hit the cold marble wall. She slipped on the wet floor, her hands scrambling for purchase. Sun should have called security. He should have drawn the gun tucked in his waistband. An intruder in his private space meant death. That was the rule. But his hand didn't move to his weapon. It stayed at his side, twitching. For the first time in years, the noise in his head, the constant calculations of enemies and profits, silenced. All he could hear was the harsh rhythm of her breathing and the water hitting the floor. The contrast of her rich, dark skin against the pristine white tiles was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. She looked like a goddess of the earth trapped in his tower of ice. The heat in the room spiked, not from the steam, but from the sudden, violent charge of attraction that arced between them. He stepped into the spray, his expensive suit instantly soaking. He towered over her, boxing her in. She trembled, waiting for the blow, waiting to be fired or worse. Sun reached out, his calloused thumb brushing a droplet of water from her chin. His touch was scorching. He leaned down, his lips brushing the shell of her ear, his voice rough with a hunger he hadn't felt in a decade. "So," he whispered, the sound dark and dangerously possessive. "The shadows finally have a light." The spell broke the moment Sandra scrambled out from under his arm. She slipped on the wet tiles, gasping, her chest heaving as she shoved past him. She didn't look back at the powerful man whose suit was dripping water onto the floor. She ran. She didn't stop running until she reached the servants' quarters in the basement. Her hands shook violently as she grabbed her worn suitcase. Stupid, stupid, stupid. She had looked the devil in the eye. In the world of the Hung Pai Syndicate, people who saw the boss vulnerable didn't get severance packages. They disappeared. "I have to go," she whispered to the empty room, throwing her few clothes into the bag. "I have to leave tonight." She made it to the service exit, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. But as she pushed the heavy steel door, it didn't budge. Going somewhere? The voice wasn't Sun's. It was his head of security, a man with a scar running down his cheek. He blocked her path, unsmiling. "The master requests your presence in the study. Immediately." Sandra felt the blood drain from her face. She was marched back up the stairs, past the judgmental eyes of Mrs. Choi, and into the lion's den. Sun was waiting. He had changed into a dry charcoal gray suit, sitting behind a massive mahogany desk. The room was dark, lit only by the city lights of Seoul below. He looked composed again, the cold mask back in place. But his eyes, they burned. I would like to resign, sir," Sandra stammered, gripping her hands together to stop the trembling. "I made a mistake. I will leave." Sun stood up slowly. The air in the room seemed to suck tight. He walked around the desk, closing the distance between them until he could smell the faint scent of the soap she had used, his soap. "Resign?" He laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "You saw me, Sandra. You saw the scars. You saw the man, not the boss." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper that sent a shiver of fear and thrill down her spine. "No one leaves the Iron Fortress with my secrets. You don't get to run. From this moment on, you are no longer a general Maid. You are mine. You answer only to me." "And if I refuse?" she dared to ask, her chin lifting slightly, a spark of defiance igniting. Sun's eyes darkened, impressed despite himself. "Then you will learn that I am not a man who asks twice." Before Sandra could protest Sun's decree, the room was bathed in a pulsing crimson light. A deafening klaxon shattered the tense silence. "Code red," Sun muttered, his demeanor shifting instantly from arrogant CEO to lethal predator. "Get down." "What?" He didn't explain. He moved with a speed that blurred, grabbing Sandra's wrist and pulling her across the room. He shoved a heavy bust of a tiger aside, revealing a biometric scanner. A hidden panel in the wall slid open, revealing a steel-reinforced panic room. "Inside, now," he commanded. Sandra stumbled in and Sun followed, sealing the door just as the muffled sound of gunfire erupted in the hallway. The panic room was small, designed for survival, not comfort. It was stocked with monitors and weapons. The space was so tight that Sun had to press Sandra against the wall to check the security feeds. "Who are they?" Sandra whispered, her voice trembling. "Vipers, a rival clan," Sun replied, his eyes glued to the screens. "They think I'm vulnerable tonight." He turned to look at her. The red emergency lighting cast deep shadows across his sharp cheekbones. They were inches apart. Sandra could feel the heat radiating from his chest. She was trapped in a box with the most dangerous man in Seoul, yet, strangely, she didn't feel unsafe. Sun looked down at her. He saw the fear in her eyes, but also a fierce resilience. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't fainting. She was standing her ground. "You're shaking," he noted, his voice dropping to that rough whisper again. "I'm terrified," she admitted, looking up at him. "You have people trying to kill you." "And yet," Sun murmured, raising a hand rested on the wall beside her head, effectively caging her, "I am only worried about one thing right now." He didn't finish the sentence, but the subtext hit Sandra like a physical blow. He was worried about her. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. The gunfire outside seemed miles away. The only reality was the rapid beat of her heart and the man whose dark eyes were tracing the line of her lips. The adrenaline began to fade, leaving a heavy silence in the cramped steel room. Sun hissed in pain, his hand moving to his side. The pristine white shirt was staining dark red. "You're bleeding," Sandra said, her fear momentarily replaced by instinct. "Let me see." "It is nothing," Sun grunted, trying to turn away. "Sit down," she commanded softly. To his own surprise, the Wolf of Seoul obeyed. He sank onto the narrow bench, and Sandra knelt between his legs. Her hands, steady now, unbuttoned his blood-soaked shirt. She gasped. It wasn't just the fresh knife wound that shocked her. It was the old canvas of pain written on his skin. A jagged, twisting burn scar covered the left side of his ribs, reaching up toward his heart. It was a mark of torture, of survival. "Fire," he said, his voice void of emotion. 7 years ago, my own brother locked the doors and lit the match. He wanted the Empire. He wanted me to burn. Sandra's fingers hovered over the scarred skin, trembling. She didn't look away in disgust. She looked at him with a profound sorrow. "He took everything that night," Sun continued, staring at the wall. "My ability to trust, my ability to feel. I became the monster they feared so I would never burn again." "You aren't a monster," Sandra whispered. She reached into her pocket, pulling out a small, worn handkerchief to press against the fresh wound. "You're just a man who forgot how to heal." She looked up, meeting his gaze. "I know what it's like to have your world burned down, son. I came to Korea with nothing but a suitcase and a name no one can pronounce right. I ran from a husband who used his fists to teach me my place. We both have scars. Yours are just on the outside." For the first time, Sun looked at her not as a possession, but as an equal. The air between them shifted from danger to something far more terrifying. Intimacy. The silence in the room changed. It was no longer heavy with threat or tragedy. It was warm, wrapping around them like a blanket. Sandra finished taping the gauze over his side. She sat back on her heels, wiping her hands. "There. It won't hold if you go fighting again, but it will keep you alive." Sun didn't button his shirt. He stayed seated, watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. But the predator was gone. The man remained. He reached out, his hand hesitating before gently touching the coils of her hair. It was a gesture of curiosity, almost reverence. "You are so different from this world," he murmured. "Here, everything is sharp, cold, plastic. You are soft." Sandra's breath hitched. She didn't pull away. "Softness is dangerous, isn't it? In your world." "Softness gets you killed," Sun agreed. His thumb grazed her cheekbone. "But right now, it is the only thing keeping me from suffocating." He leaned his head back against the steel wall, closing his eyes. For the first time, the lines of tension around his mouth smoothed out. He looked younger. He looked like a man who just wanted to rest. "Tell me," he whispered, eyes still closed. "What is your dream, Sandra? When you are not scrubbing floors for a monster?" "I want to open a bakery," she said, a small, shy smile touching her lips. "Back home. I want to make things that make people smile. Cinnamon rolls, warm bread. Things that smelled like Sunday morning. Sun opened his eyes. He looked at her, and the corner of his mouth twitched, a microscopic movement that felt like an earthquake. Sunday morning, as he repeated, tasting the words. I do not remember what a Sunday morning feels like. I could show you, she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Someday. For a moment, in that steel box buried beneath the earth, the Mafia boss and the Maid were just a man and a woman imagining a life that didn't involve blood. Sun leaned in, his forehead resting against hers. It wasn't a kiss, but it was more intimate than any he had ever shared. I would like that, he breathed. Then a sharp ping echoed through the room. The overhead light turned green. The threat was neutralized. The doors hissed open, and the cold air of reality rushed back in. They emerged from the panic room into the chaos of the main hall. Security teams were sweeping the glass debris. The moment they stepped out, Sun's lieutenant, Min Ho, rushed forward, his face pale. Sir, the Vipers, they didn't just attack. They left a message. Min Ho glanced at Sandra with open hostility. They know about her. They said the wolves. Pet is next. Sun froze. The warmth that had bloomed in the panic room evaporated instantly, replaced by a terrifying glacial stillness. He looked at the carnage around him, the shattered windows, the wounded men. He realized the mistake he had made. By letting her in, he had painted a target on her back. He couldn't protect her if she stayed. He had to sever the limb to save the body. He turned to Sandra. She reached for his arm, her eyes full of concern. Son, don't touch me, he snapped, his voice cracking like a whip. Sandra recoiled as if slapped. What? Look around you. Sun gestured to the destruction, his face twisting into a cruel sneer. This is my world. Did you think a few minutes in the dark changed anything? You are a maid. I am a king. We do not mix. But in there you said, I said what I needed to say to keep you calm. Sun lied, his heart breaking with every word. He stepped closer, towering over her, using his size to intimidate rather than comfort. You were a distraction, a moment of weakness, and I cannot afford weakness. He pulled a thick envelope of cash from his jacket pocket, emergency funds, and shoved it into her hand. Take this, it's severance. Get out of my house, get out of Seoul. If I see you again, I won't be the one saving you. Sandra stared at the money, then at him. The betrayal in her eyes was worse than any physical wound Sun had ever endured. She didn't scream. She didn't fight. She simply crumpled the envelope in her fist, her dignity forming a fragile shield around her. I feel sorry for you, she whispered, her voice shaking. Not because you're a monster, but because you're a coward. She turned and walked out the shattered front doors into the rain. Sun watched her go, his hands clenched so tight his fingernails drew blood from his palms. He stood alone in his fortress, the safest man in the city and the most miserable. 3 hours later, the iron fortress was silent. The glass had been swept. Away, the blood mopped up. It was perfect again. It was a tomb. Sun sat in the dark of his study, a glass of amber whiskey untouched on the desk. He looked at his hand, the hand that had touched her face, and felt a phantom warmth. He had done the right thing. He told himself this over and over. He had saved her from his world. But the silence was screaming at him. For 7 years, he had survived on hatred and cold ambition. But after 1 hour of warmth, the cold was no longer numb. It was agonizing. He realized that surviving wasn't living. The door creaked open. Minho stepped in, hesitating. Sir, our scouts. They report movement. Sun didn't look up. The Vipers are retreating? No, sir. Minho swallowed hard. They aren't watching the house anymore. They have a tail on a taxi, heading to Incheon Airport. Sun's glass shattered in his grip. The whiskey and blood mixed on the desk. They didn't buy it, Sun whispered, the horror dawning on him. He hadn't saved her. By sending her out alone without his protection. He had served her to them on a silver platter. "The flight leaves in 40 minutes, Minho said, checking his watch. "If we interfere, the truce is broken. It will be war. All of Seoul will burn." Sun stood up. He walked to the window, looking at the city lights. He had a choice. He could stay here, keep his crown, and let the woman who dreamed of cinnamon rolls become another casualty of his life. Or he could burn it all down for her. He thought of her eyes in the panic room. "You aren't a monster. You're just a man who forgot how to heal." He turned to Minho. The cold CEO was gone. In his place was a man possessed by a desperate, terrifying fire. "Prepare the car," Sun commanded, buttoning his jacket over his bandaged ribs. "Sir?" "Let it burn," Sun growled, walking toward the door. "I'm going to get my queen." The highway to Incheon was a river of asphalt under the relentless rain. The taxi carrying Sandra screeched to a halt as a black sedan swerved in front of it, blocking the road. Sandra gasped, clutching her chest. The Viper's men in the car behind the taxi exited, weapons drawn. But before they could reach her door, the driver of the sedan stepped out. It was Sun. He walked through the rain, ignoring the guns pointed at him. He didn't look like a CEO. He looked like a force of nature. His coat flapped in the wind, his eyes locked on the men. He didn't raise a weapon, he simply raised a hand. The Vipers lowered their guns. They knew the look on his face. It was the look of a man who had nothing left to lose. They retreated, fading back into the night. Sun ripped the taxi door open. Sandra was huddled in the corner, tears streaming down her face. "Get out," he said, breathless. "You told me to leave," she cried, hitting his chest as he pulled her into the rain. "You said I was nothing." "I lied," Sun roared, his voice cracking over the sound of the storm. He grabbed her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. The rain soaked them both, plastering their clothes to their skin, a perfect, poetic echo of the moment they met in the shower. "I lied, Sandra. I thought if I pushed you away, you would be safe. But a world without you isn't safe. It's a graveyard." He rested his forehead against hers, water dripping from his nose to hers. "I don't want the empire. I don't want the fear. I want the Sunday mornings. I want the cinnamon rolls. I want you." Sandra stopped fighting. She looked into his dark eyes and saw the truth. The ice had melted. "You're going to get wet," she whispered, a tear mixing with the rain on her cheek. "Let it rain," Sun whispered back. He lowered his head and kissed her. It wasn't a tentative touch like in the panic room. It was a claiming, a promise. It was deep, desperate, and full of life. 6 months later, the smell of warm yeast and cinnamon filled the air of a small, sunlit shop in downtown Seoul. Sandra wiped flour from her cheek, laughing as she handed a pastry to a customer. In the corner, sitting at a small table, was Sun. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wore a soft sweater, reading a book. He looked up, catching her eye. And then it happened. The dragon of the Hungpei Syndicate, the man who never felt, curved his lips upward. A genuine, warm, beautiful smile. He raised his coffee cup to her. He was no longer the master of the Iron Fortress. He was just a man in love with a baker. And for the first time in his life, he was free.